The Riverside Community Center in Ohio was not the kind of place where miracles happened. It was an old brick building with flickering hallway lights and water stains on the ceiling tiles. People came here for bingo nights, blood drives, and the occasional birthday party rental. Nothing special. Nothing worth remembering, but on one cold Saturday evening in November, something happened in that building that would be remembered by millions. Elena Marquez was 53 years old. She had gray streaks running through her dark hair, and her hands were rough from years of hard work. For the past 11 years, she had worked as a janitor at the community center. She cleaned the bathrooms, mopped the floors, emptied the trash cans, and locked up the building at night. She did her job quietly. She never complained. She never asked for attention. Most people who worked there did not even know her last name. Elena liked it that way. She had built her life around being invisible. She showed up, did her work, and went home to her small apartment, where she lived alone with a cat named Domingo. She watched old movies on television. She drank tea before bed. She did not have many friends, and she did not seem to want any. There was a sadness in her eyes that people sometimes noticed, but nobody ever asked about it. In a world full of noise, Elena had chosen silence. That Saturday, she arrived at the community center 2 hours before her shift was supposed to start. She often did this. The building was quieter in the late afternoon, and she liked to sit in the back hallway with a cup of coffee and read a book before the cleaning began. But today was different. Today, the building was alive with activity. The main hall had been transformed. There were white tablecloths on every table, flowers in tall glass vases, and strings of soft golden lights hanging from the ceiling. Men in suits and women in elegant dresses moved through the room, holding wine glasses and laughing politely. A banner near the entrance read, "Annual Charity Gala, supporting music education for underprivileged youth." Elena stood in the doorway, her cleaning cart beside her, watching the scene. She felt out of place, like a shadow that had wandered into a spotlight. She was about to turn around and wait in the back when something caught her eye. On the stage at the front of the room sat a piano. It was a Steinway grand piano, black and polished, gleaming under the lights like a jewel. Elena had not seen a piano like that in a very long time. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment, she could not move. She just stood there, staring at it, as if the instrument had called her name. Memories stirred inside her, old memories, painful ones. She pushed them down, the way she always did, and forced herself to look away. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, a woman in a red dress came rushing toward her. It was Mrs. Patterson, the event coordinator. She was a thin woman with nervous energy, always moving, always worried about something. "Oh, thank God," Mrs. Patterson said, grabbing Elena by the arm. "I need help. I need anyone. This is a disaster." Elena blinked. "What happened?" "The pianist," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice rising. "The man we hired to perform tonight. He was supposed to be here an hour ago. I just got a call. His flight was canceled. He is stuck in Chicago. He is not coming." Elena did not know what to say. "I am sorry to hear that." "Sorry does not help me," Mrs. Patterson said. She looked around the room, panic spreading across her face. "These people paid $500 a ticket. They expect entertainment. They expect music. I promised them a world-class performance, and now, I have nothing." "Nothing?" Elena shifted uncomfortably. She did not understand why Mrs. Patterson was telling her this. She was a janitor. She cleaned floors. What did any of this have to do with her? Mrs. Patterson suddenly looked at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait. You have been working here for years. I have seen you humming sometimes when you clean. Do you know anything about music?" Elena felt her heart skip. No, not really. Can you play the piano? Even a little bit? Just something to fill the time while I figure out what to do. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Anything. 10 minutes. Elena's mouth went dry. The question hit her like a wave, pulling her back to a place she had tried so hard to forget. Her hands, which had been still at her sides, began to tremble. "I cannot," she said quietly. "I am sorry." She turned to walk away. But Mrs. Patterson grabbed her arm again. "Please. I am begging you. I do not care if you only know one song. I do not care if you make mistakes. I just need someone to sit at that piano and give me time to fix this. Please." Elena looked at the woman's desperate face. Then she looked back at the piano on the stage. It sat there, waiting. Like an old friend she had abandoned long ago. Something inside her cracked. A wall she had built over many years. A wall made of grief and regret and silence. She did not say yes. She did not say anything at all. She just started walking toward the stage. The room was loud with conversation, so most people did not notice her at first. A few guests glanced up as she climbed the small steps to the stage. One woman whispered to her husband, "Who is that?" The husband shrugged and went back to his wine. Elena stood in front of the piano. She looked at the keys. 88 of them. White and black, stretching out before her like a road she had not traveled in a lifetime. She sat down on the bench. The leather was cool beneath her. She placed her hands on her lap, then slowly, carefully, lifted them to the keys. Her fingers touched the smooth surface. A shiver ran through her body. It had been so long, so many years. She had told herself she would never do this again. She had made a promise to herself, on the worst night of her life, that she would never play another note. But here she was. The room began to quiet. People turned to look. A janitor in a faded uniform, sitting at a grand piano, about to play for a crowd of wealthy strangers. Some of them smiled, amused. Some of them looked confused. One man in the front row checked his watch and sighed. Elena closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, and then, with trembling fingers, she began to play. The first notes were simple, a melody that almost everyone in the room recognized. It was Für Elise, one of the most basic classical pieces in existence. The kind of song children learn in their first year of piano lessons. A few people nodded politely. One woman whispered, "That is nice." But Elena was not finished. She played the familiar melody once, then twice. And then, on the third pass, something changed. Her fingers moved faster. The notes bent and shifted. New harmonies appeared, layered beneath the simple tune like hidden colors in a painting. The polite smiles faded. The whispers stopped. One by one, every person in that room turned toward the stage and stared, because what they were hearing was no longer Für Elise. It was something else entirely. Something none of them had ever heard before. Something that made the hair on their arms stand up and their hearts beat faster. Elena Marquez, the janitor who cleaned their bathrooms and emptied their trash, was playing like no one they had ever seen, and she was only getting started. The sound that filled the room was unlike anything those guests had ever experienced. It started soft, like rain tapping against a window. Then it grew. It swelled. It became a storm. Elena's fingers danced across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. The simple melody of Für Elise had disappeared completely. In its place was something wild and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. The notes climbed high, then dropped low. They crashed like waves, then whispered like secrets. It was as if the piano itself had come alive under her hands. A woman in the third row put down her wine glass. She had been talking to her friend about a vacation she was planning, but now she could not remember a single word of that conversation. Her mouth hung open slightly. She could not look away from the stage. A man near the back of the room had been checking his phone. He was a busy executive, always working, always distracted. But when the music reached him, he slowly lowered the phone and slipped it into his pocket. He did not touch it again for the rest of the night. One by one, the conversations died. The clinking of glasses stopped. The entire room fell silent, as if everyone had forgotten how to speak. All they could do was listen and watch. Elena sat at the piano with her eyes closed. Her body swayed gently with the music, moving like a tree in the wind. Her face, which had always seemed so tired and sad, was now transformed. There was pain there, yes, but there was also something else. Something that looked like freedom. She was not playing for the audience. She was not even aware of them anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere deep inside herself. In a place she had locked away for many years, the music was the key, and now the door was wide open. The melody shifted again. It became slower, more tender, a few notes at a time, hanging in the air like morning mist. An older gentleman in the front row felt his eyes grow wet. He did not know why. He was not a man who cried easily. He had not cried at his own father's funeral, but something about this music reached inside him and touched a wound he did not even know he had. He was not the only one. Throughout the room, people were having the same experience. The music was doing something to them. It was pulling emotions out of hiding places, bringing old memories to the surface. A woman thought of her mother, who had passed away 10 years ago. A young man thought of a relationship he had ruined with his own foolishness. Another woman thought of a dream she had given up on when she was just 22 years old. The piano spoke to each of them differently, but it spoke to all of them. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen near the side of the stage. She had asked Elena to play for 5 minutes, just to fill time. But 15 minutes had passed, and she could not bring herself to interrupt. She did not want this to end. Nobody did. A teenager near the back of the room pulled out his phone and started recording. He was the son of one of the donors, dragged to this event against his will. He had planned to hide in the corner and scroll through social media until it was time to leave, but now he held his phone up toward the stage, capturing every second. He did not know it yet, but that video would change everything. Elena continued to play. The music built again, rising like a wave about to crash. Her fingers moved so fast they were almost a blur. The notes piled on top of each other, creating harmonies that seemed impossible. It was as if 10 pianists were playing at once, not just one woman in a janitor's uniform. Then, suddenly, she stopped. The final note hung in the air for a long moment. It faded slowly, like the last light of sunset. And then there was silence, complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room was frozen, caught in the echo of what they had just witnessed. Elena opened her eyes. For a moment, she looked confused, as if she had just woken up from a dream. She looked down at her hands on the keys, then out at the crowd, and for the first time, she seemed to realize what she had done. Her face changed. The freedom that had been there moments ago was replaced by something else. Fear. Panic. She had revealed a part of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. And now she did not know what to do. She stood up quickly. Too quickly. She nearly knocked over the piano bench. Her eyes were wide, and her hands were shaking. And then the applause began. It started with one person. The older gentleman in the front row, the one who had felt tears in his eyes. He rose to his feet and began to clap. Then the woman beside him stood up. Then another person, and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet. The applause was thunderous. It echoed off the walls and shook the chandeliers. People were cheering, shouting, some of them wiping tears from their faces. Elena stood on the stage, frozen. She did not know how to react. She had not heard applause like this in over 20 years. She had almost forgotten what it felt like. Mrs. Patterson rushed onto the stage. Her face was flushed with excitement. She grabbed Elena's hand and held it up, like a boxing referee declaring a winner. The crowd cheered even louder. "What is your name, Mrs.?" Patterson shouted over the noise. Elena hesitated. Her voice came out small and uncertain. "Elena. Elena Marquez." Mrs. Patterson turned to the crowd and announced the name into a microphone. More cheers. More applause. People were pulling out their phones now, taking pictures, recording videos. The teenager in the back was still filming, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Elena pulled her hand away from Mrs. Patterson. She took a step back, then another. The applause was overwhelming. The attention was suffocating. She had spent so many years hiding, And now suddenly she was exposed. Naked. Vulnerable. She turned and walked off the stage. Mrs. Patterson called after her. But Elena did not stop. She walked quickly through a side door, down a hallway, and into a storage closet. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. In the darkness of that closet, surrounded by mops and cleaning supplies, Elena Marquez began to cry. She cried for the music she had just played. She cried for the memories it had awakened. She cried for her mother, who had first taught her to play on a broken piano in their tiny apartment in Havana. She cried for her father, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her lessons. She cried for the girl she used to be, the prodigy who had performed on the greatest stages in the world, and she cried for the woman she had become. The invisible janitor. The ghost who cleaned floors and lived alone and never let anyone see who she really was. Outside the closet, she could still hear the muffled sound of applause. People were calling her name. They wanted more. They wanted to know who she was and where she had come from and how a janitor could play like that. But Elena was not ready to tell them. She was not ready to go back to that world. She had left it behind for a reason, and that reason still haunted her every single day. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. She would wait here until everyone left. Then she would go home, feed her cat, and pretend this night had never happened. That was the plan. But outside in the main hall, a teenage boy was uploading a video to the internet. He added a simple caption. "Random janitor just played piano at my parents' charity thing. I have no words." He pressed the share button, and within hours, Elena Marquez's life would change forever. Whether she was ready for it or not, Elena did not sleep that night. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, while Domingo the cat curled up beside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back on that stage. She could feel the keys beneath her fingers. She could hear the applause echoing in her ears. She had promised herself she would never play again. She had kept that promise for 23 years. And now, in one moment of weakness, she had broken it. The memories came flooding back whether she wanted them or not. She was born in Havana, Cuba, in a neighborhood where the buildings were old and the streets were narrow, and music floated out of every window. Her parents were not wealthy. Her father worked at a factory that made shoes. Her mother cleaned houses for families who lived in the nicer parts of the city. They did not have much, but they had love, and they had music. Elena's mother had learned to play piano as a young girl, taught by her own grandmother. They could not afford a real piano, so she practiced on a broken one that someone had thrown away. Half the keys did not work, but she played it anyway. She played it every night after dinner, filling their tiny apartment with melodies that made the neighbors stop and listen through the walls. When Elena was 4 years old, her mother sat her down at that broken piano and placed her small fingers on the keys. She showed her a simple scale. Up and down. Up and down. Elena played it once, then twice. By the third time, she was adding notes of her own. Her mother knew right away that her daughter was different. By the time Elena was 6, she had outgrown everything her mother could teach her. A neighbor who heard her playing through the wall told a friend, who told another friend, who told a music teacher at the local conservatory. The teacher came to their apartment one evening, skeptical that a child from this neighborhood could have any real talent. He left 2 hours later with tears in his eyes. The teacher arranged for Elena to receive a scholarship. She began studying at the conservatory, surrounded by children from wealthy families who looked down on her worn clothes and her calloused hands. But when she sat at the piano, none of that mattered. When she played, everyone listened. At age 9, she performed her first public concert. At age 11, she won a national competition. At age 12, something happened that changed her life forever. A famous conductor from the United States visited Havana. He heard Elena play at a small recital, and by the end of the night, he had arranged for her to perform at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world. And Elena Marquez, a 12-year-old girl from a poor neighborhood in Havana, was going to play there. The night of the concert, she was so nervous she could barely breathe. She stood backstage, wearing a dress her mother had sewn by hand, listening to the murmur of 2,000 people waiting to hear her. Her father held her hand and told her she was going to be wonderful. Her mother kissed her forehead and whispered, "Play for me, my love. Just play for me. Just play for me." Elena walked onto that stage and sat down at the piano. The lights were blinding. The silence was deafening. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and began to play. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet. The applause lasted for 11 minutes. Critics called it one of the greatest debut performances they had ever witnessed. Newspapers around the world printed her picture. She was called a genius, a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent. Elena Marquez was 12 years old, and she had the whole world at her feet. But the world has a way of taking things away. When Elena was 19, everything changed. Political tensions in Cuba grew worse. Her father had spoken out against certain policies, and soon their family was being watched. Neighbors stopped talking to them. Friends disappeared. One night, a man came to their door and told them they needed to leave. Immediately. If they stayed, there would be consequences. They fled in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They left behind their apartment, their friends, their entire lives. Elena left behind her piano, the beautiful instrument that had been given to her after Carnegie Hall. She did not even have time to play it one last time. The journey to America was long and dangerous. They traveled by boat, crowded together with dozens of other families, who were also running from the same fears. The water was rough, the boat was old. Elena's mother, who had always been fragile, grew sick during the crossing. They arrived in Florida 3 weeks later. Elena's mother was rushed to a hospital. The doctors did everything they could, but it was not enough. The stress of the journey, the lack of medicine, the broken heart of leaving everything behind, it was too much. Elena's mother died on a Tuesday morning, holding her daughter's hand. Her last words were a whisper that Elena would carry with her for the rest of her life. "Keep playing, my love. Promise me. Keep playing." But Elena could not keep that promise. Every time she looked at a piano, she saw her mother's face. Every time she heard music, she felt the weight of everything she had lost. The instrument that had once been her greatest joy became a symbol of her greatest pain. She stopped playing. She stopped performing. She stopped being Elena Marquez, the prodigy. She changed her life completely. She took small jobs. She moved from city to city. She became invisible. Her father passed away 5 years later, his heart broken by grief and exile. Elena was alone now, truly alone. She settled in Ohio because it was far from everything she had known. She took a job as a janitor because it let her work at night, when no one could see her. She built a life of silence and shadows, and she never touched a piano again, until that night at the community center. Now, lying in her bed at 3 in the morning, Elena felt the weight of 23 years pressing down on her chest. She had broken her silence. She had let the music out, and she did not know if she could ever put it back. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. She did not have many contacts in her phone. Just her landlord, her supervisor at work, and the woman who ran the corner store near her apartment. None of them would be calling at this hour. She picked up the phone and looked at the screen. She had 17 missed calls, all from numbers she did not recognize. She also had dozens of text messages and even more emails. Her heart began to pound. She opened one of the emails. The subject line read, "CNN request, interview about viral piano video." Her hands started shaking. She opened another email. This one was from a producer at Good Morning America. Another was from BBC News. Another was from a journalist in Spain. Another was from Japan. Elena dropped the phone like it had burned her. She grabbed her laptop, an old machine she rarely used, and opened the internet. She typed her name into the search bar. What she saw made her gasp. The video from the charity gala was everywhere. It had been viewed over 10 million times in less than 12 hours. It was on every news website. every social media platform, every corner of the internet. And people were not just watching, they were digging, they were searching. Old articles from Cuba were being translated and shared. Photos from her Carnegie Hall performance were circulating. Someone had found footage of her playing as a child. The world was discovering who she really was. Elena sat in the blue glow of her laptop screen, tears streaming down her face. She had spent 23 years hiding. 23 years, running from her past. And now, in a single night, the past had found her. The next few days were a blur of chaos and confusion. Elena unplugged her phone. She stopped checking her email. She closed the curtains in her apartment and did not leave except to buy food from the corner store, where she wore a hat pulled low over her face. But the world did not care that she wanted to hide. The world had found her, and it was not going to let her go. Reporters showed up at the community center, asking questions about the mysterious janitor. Her co-workers, people who had barely spoken to her in 11 years, were suddenly being interviewed on television. They all said the same thing. She was quiet. She kept to herself. They had no idea she could play like that. Someone leaked her address. A news van parked outside her apartment building. Then another. Then 3 more. Elena watched them through a gap in her curtains, her heart pounding with fear. She felt like an animal being hunted. The video continued to spread. By the end of the first week, it had been viewed over 50 million times. People were sharing it with captions like, "This made me cry," and "The most beautiful thing I have ever heard," and "Who is this woman?" Comments poured in from every corner of the globe. People in Brazil, in India, in Germany, in Australia, all of them moved by the same 3 minutes of music. Then the deeper stories started to surface. Journalists began piecing together her past. They found old interviews from Cuban newspapers. They found footage from her Carnegie Hall debut, grainy but unmistakable. They found people who had known her as a child, teachers and neighbors who remembered the little girl with the extraordinary gift. The headlines wrote themselves: "Child prodigy vanishes for 23 years, resurfaces as janitor in Ohio." The tragic story behind the viral piano video. From Carnegie Hall to cleaning floors. The hidden life of Elena Marquez. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Talk shows sent producers to knock on her door. Book publishers sent letters offering deals. Movie studios called, wanting to buy the rights to her story. A famous director left a voicemail saying he wanted to make a documentary about her life. Elena ignored all of it. She could not understand why the world cared so much. She had played a song at a charity event. That was all. She was not special. She was not a prodigy anymore. She was just a tired woman who had made a mistake by sitting down at a piano. But the world saw something different. The world saw a woman who had lost everything and still carried beauty inside her. The world saw pain transformed into art. The world saw hope. Elena did not see any of that. She only saw the past catching up to her. She only saw her mother's face, heard her mother's voice, felt the weight of a promise she had broken. She called her supervisor and said she was sick. She could not go back to work. Not with the reporters outside. Not with everyone knowing who she was. Her supervisor, a kind man who had never asked her many questions, told her to take all the time she needed. Her job would be waiting for her when she was ready, but Elena did not know if she would ever be ready. On the 10th day, something changed. Elena had not checked her mail in over a week. The box in the lobby of her building was overflowing. She waited until 3 in the morning, when she was sure no one would see her, and crept downstairs to collect it. Most of the envelopes were from media companies and publishers. She threw those away without opening them. But buried in the pile, she found something different. A small pink envelope with messy handwriting on the front. The return address was from Detroit, Michigan. The name written in the corner was Rosita Delgado, and next to it, in parentheses, was written, age 9. Elena stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then she opened it. Inside was a letter written on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky and uneven. the letters of a child still learning to write neatly. There were a few words crossed out and corrected. A small drawing of a piano was sketched in the corner. The letter read, "Dear Mrs. Elena, my name is Rosita, and I am 9 years old. I play the piano, but I am not very good. The kids at my school make fun of me. They say I am wasting my time. They say piano is boring and stupid. Sometimes I want to quit. But then my mom showed me your video. She was crying when she watched it. I watched it too, and I did not understand why she was crying at first. But then I watched it again. And again. I have watched it 47 times now. When you play, it does not sound like piano. It sounds like feelings. Like when you are sad and happy at the same time. I did not know music could sound like that. My mom told me about your story. She told me you stopped playing for a long time because something bad happened. That made me sad. But then you played again. You played so beautiful. I decided I am not going to quit. I am going to keep practicing. Maybe one day I can play like you. Probably not. But I am going to try. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for playing again. You made me believe I can be something. Please do not stop. Please keep playing. Love, Rosita. P.S. I drew you a picture of a piano. I hope you like it. Elena read the letter once. Then she read it again. Then she held it against her chest and began to cry. She cried harder than she had cried in years. Harder than she had cried since the night her mother died. The tears came from somewhere deep inside her. From a place she had kept locked away for so long. A 9-year-old girl in Detroit had watched her video 47 times. A child she had never met, would probably never meet, had decided not to give up because of her. Because of 3 minutes of music played by a janitor in Ohio. Elena looked at the small drawing in the corner of the letter. It was simple and imperfect, the way children's drawings always are. But it was also beautiful. It was filled with hope. She thought about her mother. She thought about that night in the hospital, holding her mother's hand as she slipped away. She heard her mother's last words again, as clear as if she were standing right there in the room. Keep playing, my love. Promise me. Keep playing. Elena had broken that promise. She had broken it for 23 years. But maybe it was not too late. Maybe promises could be remade. Maybe the music she had locked away could finally be set free. She walked to her window and opened the curtains for the first time in days. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The news vans were still there. But she did not feel afraid of them anymore. She looked down at Rosita's letter one more time. Then she picked up her phone, turned it on, and scrolled through the hundreds of messages until she found one that mattered. It was from the director of Lincoln Center in New York City. He had written a long message about how moved he had been by her video. He said the world deserved to hear her play again. He said they would give her the stage whenever she was ready. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door. Elena read the message 3 times. Her hands were trembling, her heart was pounding. Then, slowly, she began to type a reply. Thank you for your message. I think I am ready. Please tell me what I need to do. She pressed send before she could change her mind. Outside her window, the sun continued to rise. And somewhere in Detroit, a 9-year-old girl named Rosita was practicing her scales, dreaming of the day she might play like the woman who had given her hope. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at Lincoln Center in New York City. The same city where she had performed as a 12-year-old girl. The same city where her life had changed forever, all those years ago. But she was not that girl anymore. She was 53 years old now. Her hair was gray. Her hands were rough. The dress she wore tonight was simple and black, nothing like the fancy gown her mother had sewn for her Carnegie Hall debut. She had chosen it herself from a small shop in Ohio, and she liked the way it felt. Comfortable. Real. Like her, through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience. Nearly 3,000 people had come to see her tonight. The concert had sold out in less than 4 minutes. People had flown in from all over the world, from Japan, from Brazil, from Germany, from a dozen other countries she could not even name. All of them here for one reason: to hear the janitor play. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were trembling. For a moment, the old fear came rushing back. The fear that had kept her silent for 23 years. The fear that whispered she was not good enough, that she did not deserve to be here, that she should turn around and walk away and never look back. But then she thought of Rosita. The little girl from Detroit was somewhere in that audience tonight. Elena had arranged for her and her mother to fly to New York as her personal guests. They had met for the first time yesterday, in a small coffee shop near the hotel. Rosita was tiny, with big brown eyes and hair pulled back in 2 braids. She had been so nervous she could barely speak. But when Elena hugged her, the girl had held on tight and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Elena had cried, right there in the coffee shop, in front of everyone. She did not care who saw. Now, standing backstage, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was Rosita's letter, the one she had received 3 months ago. She had read it so many times that the paper was soft and worn, the creases almost falling apart. But she carried it with her everywhere. It reminded her why she was doing this. A stagehand approached her. A young man with kind eyes and a clipboard in his hand. "5 minutes, Miss Marquez," he said softly. "Are you ready?" Elena looked at him. Was she ready? She did not know. She did not think anyone could ever be ready for something like this. But she nodded anyway. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." The stagehand smiled and walked away. Elena turned back toward the curtain. She could see a sliver of the stage through the gap in the fabric. The piano was already there, waiting for her. A Steinway grand, just like the one at the community center. Just like the one at Carnegie Hall. All those years ago, she thought about her mother. She always thought about her mother. But tonight, the memories did not hurt as much as they usually did. Tonight, they felt warm, comforting, like a hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward. She could almost hear her mother's voice. "Play for me, my love. Just play for me." The lights in the audience dimmed. The murmur of conversation faded into silence. A man's voice came over the speakers, rich and deep. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lincoln Center is honored to present a very special performance tonight. 23 years ago, she walked away from music. Tonight, she returns. Please welcome to the stage, Elena Marquez." The curtain parted. Elena stepped into the light. The applause hit her like a wave. 3,000 people rising to their feet, clapping and cheering before she had even played a single note. The sound was overwhelming. It filled the hall, bounced off the walls, wrapped around her like an embrace. She walked slowly across the stage, her legs shaking beneath her. The piano seemed very far away. Each step felt like a mile. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until finally, she was there. She stood beside the piano and looked out at the audience. She could not see individual faces because of the lights, but she knew they were there. Thousands of strangers who had come to hear her story. Thousands of people who believed she had something worth saying. And somewhere in the middle of them, a 9-year-old girl with braids in her hair and hope in her heart. Elena sat down on the bench. The leather was cool beneath her, just like it had been that night at the community center. She placed her hands on her lap and stared at the keys. 88 of them, white and black, waiting for her to bring them to life. The hall was completely silent now. Not a cough, not a whisper. 3,000 people holding their breath. Elena closed her eyes. She thought of her mother teaching her scales on a broken piano in Havana. She thought of her father working 3 jobs so she could have lessons. She thought of Carnegie Hall and the 11 minutes of applause that had changed her life. She thought of the boat ride to America, the hospital room, the last words her mother ever spoke. She thought of 23 years of silence, 23 years of hiding, 23 years of grief so heavy it had crushed the music right out of her. And then she thought of Rosita's letter. I did not know music could sound like that. Thank you for not giving up. Please keep playing. Elena opened her eyes. She lifted her hands to the keys, and she began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle, like a whisper in a quiet room. They floated out into the hall and hung in the air like mist. The audience leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by the sound. Then the music began to build. It grew stronger, more confident. The notes came faster, layering on top of each other, creating harmonies that seemed to shimmer and glow. Elena's fingers danced across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. She was not thinking anymore. She was not afraid. She was just playing. The music told her story. The joy of her childhood, the triumph of her early success, the terror of fleeing her home, the heartbreak of losing her mother, the long years of silence and shadow. And finally, the moment of rebirth. The moment she sat down at a piano in a community center in Ohio and remembered who she really was. It was all there in the music, every tear, every smile, every moment of despair and every spark of hope. She was not just playing notes, she was playing her life. The audience felt it. They felt every emotion, every memory, every ounce of pain and beauty that Elena poured into those keys. Some of them cried. Some of them smiled. Some of them sat perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. And in the middle of the hall, a 9-year-old girl named Rosita watched with wide eyes and an open heart. She held her mother's hand and listened to every note. She did not fully understand everything she was hearing. She was too young for that, but she understood enough. She understood that music could heal, that pain could become beauty, that it was never too late to start again. The final notes rang out across the hall. They hung in the air for a long moment, shimmering like stars. And then, they faded into silence. Elena lifted her hands from the keys. She opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Then the applause began. It started as a rumble and grew into a roar. 3,000 people on their feet, clapping and cheering and crying. The sound was deafening. It shook the chandeliers and rattled the windows. It went on, wave after wave, until Elena lost count of the minutes. She stood up from the bench, her legs unsteady. Tears streamed down her face. But she was smiling. For the first time, in 23 years, she was truly smiling. She looked out at the crowd and whispered 2 words that no one could hear above the thunder of applause. 2 words meant only for one person. A woman who had been gone for more than 2 decades but who had never really left. For you, Mama. Then she bowed her head, placed her hand over her heart, and let the love of 3,000 strangers wash over her like a wave. Elena Marquez, the janitor from Ohio, the child prodigy from Havana, had finally come home.